Hey, Shep here at Iron Anchor Cycles, and we've got another video for you. We had a little bit of a hiatus there where we weren't making too many videos, and that was the beginning of the season, but kind of got back in the groove of it, and we're gonna try and keep on our schedule of trying to do at least one a week for you guys, doing different things here around the shop with different bikes, and hopefully we've got a little bit of something for everybody. So today's project is something that I think is probably pretty relevant to a lot of people, and I say that because we do maybe more of this than almost anything else. Although we are a speed shop and a performance shop, and our favorite stuff to do is motor builds and other performance related upgrades, handlebars are something that is pretty universal to everybody out there, whether you're trying to go higher or lower, narrower or wider, T-bars or apes, whatever it might be. Most people, it seems, want to change the bars on their bike, and so we do a lot of that. So the bike that's going to get the treatment today is going to be this Street Glide Special that's right here behind me. This is a pretty new Milwaukee 8 Street Glide, and it's got, as you can see, stock bars on it. And we're going to be installing a set of LA Choppers 14-inch bars on here. So these are going to be an ape hanger style bar with the kind of mitered peaks on them, pretty traditional for LA Choppers. And a bar that we do a lot of in various sizes. Usually 12s and 14s are pretty common. So this one is going to be getting, like I said, the 14s, and we're going to be doing them in black. So what I think we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get started on the bike, and we'll kind of pop back in with the video at certain points along the way to check on the progress and kind of let you know what we've done. And as in other videos, I will try to make sure we get the camera on and focused on some of the details that I think might be either snags or holdups for people or things you're not sure of. One other thing I want to point out is that in addition to doing the bars, we are also going to be installing a set of Alloy Art polyurethane riser bushings as well. So that's an upgrade or an addition that we recommend for basically everybody who's doing anything with their bars. It just makes sense to upgrade those rubber bushings, particularly when you're putting a taller bar on and giving yourself more leverage. So because of that, the install is a little bit different on the baggers. If you've got a Dyna or a Softail or basically something without a fairing, doing the riser bushings is pretty simple, and you can see what you've got to do right from the outside of the bike. You've got bolts on the bottom, they go through the risers and up into, they go through the triple tree and up into the risers, and you just take those bolts out, take the risers off, and change the bushings. On the baggers, you actually need to remove the top triple tree or the steering head in order to get access to those bolts. So it's a little bit more involved when you're doing it on one of these, and definitely is not difficult to do or impossible to do, just requires a few more steps. So while you might say it is possible to do a set of bars on a Street Glide by just tilting your fairing forward, removing the outer fairing, tilting the inner fairing forward, that's what the Harley manual will tell you. We're actually going to go ahead and just take it all completely off. I find it's a lot safer not having that fairing tilted forward and just wanting to fall off and crash onto the floor, or better yet, onto your fender. We just disconnect everything and take it all off and just get right down to the steering head. And that way we can do the bushings and everything is safe and out of the way. So that's what you're going to see. In addition to that, there's another benefit of doing it that way, and we'll get to that a little bit later, so stick around. And what that has to do with is a little bit of a way to hopefully save you some money. So let's go ahead and get started on taking this apart, and we'll check back in with an update. All right, so we started our disassembly and wanted to just jump back in with a little bit of footage here. This can be a part that some folks can have some difficulty with or get a little overwhelmed by. And that's dealing with the wiring in here. I'm not going to show you all the connectors and which one is which, but essentially what I'm going to tell you to do is take a couple of pictures with your phone so you know where it all goes, and then just start disconnecting it and make sure that anything that's attached to the bike gets disconnected from anything that's attached to the fairing. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to continue with the process here. Okay, so that looks like all of them. Like I said, basically it's attached to the bike, disconnected from the fairing. The stuff that's all internal in the fairing, obviously you don't need to remove it. Like this particular harness here that's coming from the radio and then going up to the top here, that can all stay. It didn't take very long. It's really just a couple of pieces that need to get unplugged. It looks a lot more intimidating than it is. So make sure you've got your turn signals taken off on the left and right side, and the harness for the turn signals, you get that plug pulled through these holes and back inside. Otherwise, when you go to take the fairing off, it's going to get caught and the fairing's not going to want to come off. So we're going to go ahead and continue removing this, and we'll check back in. All right, so you can see we've got our fairing off, and basically from where I was undoing the electrical connections, which are here, I came around to the back side of the fairing and took off our ignition switch, as well as the valence underneath, which has a couple of electrical connections as well. I did want to point a couple of things out about that. So removing the ignition switch does not require any special tools. You're basically turning the switch to the lock position, putting the key in, pushing the button on the underside of it, and then turning the key to release the mechanism. At that point, there is another piece to remove, and let me grab that. You've got this collar and then nut that goes on top of the steering stem. You're going to want to take these off because it's going to allow that plastic valance to come out without breaking. It's all one piece on this bike. On some of the older Street Glides and some other models, it's a two-piece design where it looks like you might be able to get that little internal piece out with this there. You're going to break it. There's very, very delicate tabs on that piece, and just take this off. This isn't on very tight. This is a plastic fitted piece here. So although it looks like you might need some sort of funky like spanner or something like that to do this, just take an adjustable wrench, just put it on there and just loosely turn it and it'll turn. And the same thing to put it back on. Just, you know, not too tight and you'll be fine. Beyond that, the reason you have to take all of this stuff off is because you have to undo these electrical connections. So once you have your ignition switch out, it's going to be in the lock position. And when doing bars on a fork-mounted fairing bike, you really probably can leave that in the lock position and not move the front wheel, not move the fork at all, and be able to do everything you're going to want to do. I mention this because if you do turn the wheel while the ignition is in the lock position, the fork is going to then be locked, and your ignition switch is off. So how are you going to unlock it? Well, you could put it back on and unlock it and turn the wheel back and do what you have to do. But essentially, you're going to have to remember all of that. And the much easier solution to that is just to get yourself an ignition tool. So what this does is it's keyed the same as the rod on the end of the ignition switch, and it goes down in here, and you put it in, and you can operate the ignition switch just as if you had the switch actually in there. If you're doing a road glide or a fork-mounted fairing bike, you are going to absolutely have to turn the handlebars and the fork back and forth to get to all of the things you need to get to. So just keep that in mind. These can be had pretty inexpensively, and it's an invaluable tool. What you do not want to do is stick a screwdriver or something like that in here and turn it. Because what you're going to do is you're going to turn the top half and not the bottom half, and the keys are going to get out of alignment, and you're not going to be able to get the ignition switch back in. So it'll feel like it's going in, and you're going to say, oh great, awesome, my ignition switch goes in, it clicks, it's good, and you're going to turn it and nothing is going to happen. And then you're going to have a bear getting it off, and you're going to have to go in there and try and realign those keys, and it's a pain in the ass. Don't ask me how I know. So that said, we're going to continue on doing this. Nothing crazy to call out here. I mean, now that this is taken apart, obviously you can see how easy this looks with the fairing removed, which took an extra, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes. So rather than leaning it out here and it being in the way and all that, just take it off. That's my advice anyway. So from here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut some wire ties, we're gonna get some of this stuff out of the way, and we're gonna take our handlebar controls off, and we're gonna go ahead and get the bars and then the top triple tree removed. So stick around and we'll be right back. All right, so once you've got your hand controls taken off and you've gotten all your wiring disconnected and all those little clips, those zip ties cut, you'll basically be at this point where everything is nice and clear and you're able to get your bars off. Now, if you're just taking your bars off and you're leaving your bushings in place, which again, I don't really recommend, but maybe you're doing this for the second time and you've already got good bushings in there, you could just remove your top clamp here and take the bars off. But because we're going to be changing the bushings, we're actually going to take the steering head, the top triple tree off with the bars rather than doing it piece by piece. And the reason for that, I'll show you in just a minute, is that it makes it a lot easier to undo your riser bolts when the bars are still in place. So obviously that just slipped right off, and what we did to do that was just release or loosen the pinch bolts in all 3 spots, and then this just pulls right up. So what I'm talking about is these 2 bolts, which are the 1/2-inch bolts that hold your bottom riser in place. And when this is on the bike, there's a steel plate here so that you can't get to these, which means you have to take this off to do it. Now, the reason I mentioned it's easier with the bars, I don't know if that's obvious at this point or not, but with the bar in place, it holds the bottom of the riser. If you try and turn this bolt without a handlebar in here, it's gonna spin the top of the bottom of the riser here. You can hold it with something and it's totally doable. You could just clamp a set of bars back in, but as long as it's all together, this makes it a lot easier to take that off. So we take this off and then we disconnect the riser from the handlebar once it's taken apart. So let me set this aside. And I want to talk about the other reason I mentioned why taking all of this apart is actually a big advantage for you. And what that has to do with is the old conventional wisdom that any bars taller than 12 inches on a batwing fairing bike, you're going to need to replace all of your lines and cables. Now, I'm not saying you can get away with this every time, but it certainly works some of the time and it's worth trying, which is once you have this top triple tree off, you're now able to really reroute your brake and clutch lines in different ways that are going to make the run a lot shorter. And what I mean by that is it's a little bit hard to see and you're going to have to sort of take my word for it. But in both cases, the lines kind of come up from the side and they wrap around and then they, come up and through. If you can figure out a way to route these lines so that they don't take this big extra loop, that might give you the space you need in order to go up 4 or 6 inches on your bars, whatever it might be. So it's not going to work all the time, and every bike's a little different and every bar is a little different, but we always like to try and do this first to reuse the lines when we can. Obviously, you have to be careful doing this. You can't just route the line any old way and just have at it. You really got to be careful to make sure it's not going to get pinched, to make sure that it's not going to get cut by anything, and to make sure you really do have enough slack, right? So that when you go from full lock to full lock on both sides, nothing gets pulled, nothing gets pinched, nothing gets broken. We've had a lot of success with this, and I highly recommend you at least take a look at it before you spend the money to replace all of your lines. Now, part of the reason we say that is, it's not just the cost of the brake and clutch lines, both hydraulic in the case of Bagger up to 2020. It's the labor, right? So there's other disassembly that has to happen in more time. You got to deal with the fluid and bleeding and all that stuff. And in a lot of cases, it's just way easier to do it this way. So what we're going to do is go over to the workbench. We're going to get the bars separated from that top clamp. We're going to put our new bushings in. We're going to get the bars wired up with the controls. And then we're going to start to look at fitting everything and see if we're going to be able to reuse these lines and cables. And to be honest, I don't know. We just did a set of these exact same 14-inch bars on a CVO Street Glide, and we had plenty of line to spare on both sides. But who knows, maybe this Street Glide is a little different and we're gonna have to wind up doing something a little different. But my hope is that we can just use everything as is and get the bars on and get this bike out the door and off to a happy customer. So in any event, we're gonna start doing that disassembly and we'll check back in. All right, so checking back in from where we left off. We went ahead and, like I said, got our new bars put on and wired up and the controls on, and we did all of this stuff on the bench, obviously. So with our new bushings in the top triple tree, we put that back on and our wires are run, and you can see all that here. Not sure if it's visible in the video or not, or if you can tell. We did install heated grips on this bike, which just makes the wiring a little bit more complicated. You just got to follow the instructions and make sure you run the wires and the bars that you need to run for them. Just a couple of little call outs on wiring bars. I'm not, I didn't film that part. There's, I'm sure, plenty of videos out there showing you, how to depin these connectors and, how to fish the wires through the bars and all that stuff. It's pretty, it's pretty easy once you've done it a few times. It can be a little frustrating right off the bat. A couple of tips I'll give you. The biggest one, it's kind of like anything else. The prep is the most important thing. If you just kind of try to attach something onto the end of the wires and try and pull them through, it's not going to work. There are certain bars and certain situations where these small CAN bus connectors don't need to be taken off. For example, if you're doing like a tracker bar with a riser and all you're doing is pulling the wires through the short bar, yeah, these are going to go through no problem. The bigger the bar with the more significant bends in it, like you've got a pretty, it's about a 90-degree mitered bend on these bars, which is getting towards difficult. There are others where you've got that sort of closed 90-degree mitered bend. I'm thinking like a Yaffe bar kind of thing. Those are not easy to pull wires through. The wires really don't want to go up and around that. So you really want to make it as easy as possible on yourself. Don't try it with the connectors on, take the connectors off. Just do that right off the bat. If you've got big, thick sort of jackets on the wires, take those off and put smaller ones on. Tape them up. Do whatever you can to get it as small as possible and as easy to fit through. Using soapy water helps to get the wires to go through the bars easier, and just take your time and push and pull at the same time and you'll get it. If the wire or string or whatever you're using to pull the harness through breaks, just pull it back out and do it again. It has a tendency, the soapy water can sometimes, mess up your tape or whatever you use to connect it. I won't get too much else into it, but just take your time and you'll get it done. What I wanted to come back and show you was kind of like I promised, we would make the effort to reuse our stock brake and clutch lines, and obviously we've been able to do that here. We haven't, gone and zip tied them into place yet, but as you can see, these are plenty long enough. And what that required us doing was two things. The first was here on the clutch side. It's probably going to be hard to see in the video, but basically this clutch line ran through this hole on the right side of the steering stem and between the right fork and the steering stem. So, and then it came around the front of the steering stem and up. What we did was we ran it under the neck of the bike, behind the steering stem, and then up through between the left fork and the steering stem. And what that gives you is a whole lot of extra slack. Obviously you can see that here. This is going to work really well. There's nothing that's going to get caught or anything like that down here. We will double check all of it just to make sure that, we've got the clearance and everything that we need, but you'll see when it's done. It looks great. It enters the fairing the same way it's supposed to, and it just exits below on the left side instead of on the right side. No big deal. The brake, even easier. Basically all we did here was released the brake from the little cable carrier that it was in, which just allows it, instead of having to go so far forward before it comes up, now it can start coming up as soon as it needs to. The other thing that we're going to do, which I haven't done yet, is as you can see, because of the angle of the old bars, the banjo fittings on both master cylinders are kind of sticking out or forward at an angle, and we're going to loosen these up and we're going to push them and tuck them in so they're parallel with the bars. Two reasons to do that. One, it looks better instead of having these sticking out. But more importantly, the thing you've got to remember when you're doing the bars on the Street Glide is, your fairing is going to be here, and you obviously want to get the bars as close as you can to it. But if you're too close or your bars are standing too straight up and down, you're going to hit the fairing and there's not going to be room. So I've done this a couple of times. I've got a pretty good idea of where the bars need to be in the right position, the right angle. But if it's your first time or you're not sure, just test fit, put the fairing on, see, does that work? Sit on the bike, grab onto it, do what you got to do, and you'll be good. The other thing is you still have access to these front two clamp screws once the inner fairing is back on. So if you do need to reposition the bars, it's not a big deal. You just loosen the front two, move the bars where you need to move them, and then tighten those again. When I say front, that's really wrong. It's front like it's facing towards you. It's the rear two clamp screws on the clamp. The ones closest to you, which would be the rear. So that all said, we're in a pretty good spot here. I'm going to go ahead and adjust these lines, and I'm going to get them kind of routed the way I want. And we're gonna go ahead and put the inner fairing back on and make sure everything fits and everything is the way we want it. And we'll check back in with getting this buttoned up. All right, so here's a quick check-in on our progress. We've got our inner fairing back on. We didn't do any of the electrical connections yet on the front side, but we did route our cables and make sure that the fairing fit with nothing binding. What I wanted to show you here was kind of this stage before you button everything back up. So I mentioned you can get to these two rear screws here with the inner fairing on. I probably should have been more clear. You can't get to them with the inner fairing in its place, but you can just pull it back a little bit and get to them if you need to make an adjustment. In our case, we didn't. We're happy with where the bars are. This is kind of what I was hinting at here about the space. You don't have a lot of room between the bars and the fairing, and even less so down here at the lower part. There is a cutout to a certain extent to allow for the bars, so these probably could go in a little bit closer than they are, but they really don't need to. They're standing at the correct angle. So you can also see how with the, hopefully you can see with the brake and clutch banjo bolts, with these banjo fittings I should say, if they were kicked out still, they would have made contact here with the fairing. But as it is, they run down really nicely right along the bars and they tuck in right under the fairing just the way that they used to. And so we really haven't lost any functionality at all. And we'll triple check and make sure that we've got motion side to side and we're not binding or hooking on anything, but just by moving those lines around just a little bit, you can really free up a lot of extra slack in them to do what you want to do. So from here, what we're gonna do is make all of our electrical connections. We're gonna finish buttoning everything back up and we'll come back and kind of wrap up and show you what this looks like all done. All right, so that is gonna be a wrap on these 14-inch LA Choppers bars on this Street Glide Special. So obviously you can see everything is back together here, and at least me personally, I think this looks awesome. There are a lot of benefits of the 14-inch bars in particular. Some of those I think hopefully you can see here. One is you can obviously add mirrors here up top if you want to, but the bars are high enough that the OE fairing mounted mirrors are visible underneath the bars. And depending on your height, the angle may still work for you. For some people, your elbows might get in the way, but it's worth a shot anyway if you like the way that looks. The other piece that's pretty great about these is that I think, like we showed, you really don't have to necessarily extend your lines. The wiring always is going to have to be done. That's just a fact of running the wires internally, and obviously that's a hell of a lot cleaner than how it comes. So do the wiring, but the lines in this case didn't need to be extended. And there are certain bars, certain 14-inch bars that kind of have they're known to fit with stock lines. I would venture to say that just about all of them probably can if you get a little bit creative. So this is a great upgrade, and I think our customer is going to be really happy with it. Hopefully I showed you that this really isn't that difficult to do. I think bars can be a little bit intimidating when it comes to having to do the lines or the wiring or taking the fairing off or any of that. Getting bars done at a shop like ours or at a dealership is not an inexpensive prospect. I think the going rate for a dealership, the quote for doing bars is a little bit crazy. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I've been told it's 6 to 7 hours of labor is what a dealership is going to quote to do a job like this. I think that's pretty nuts personally. Our rate, for what it's worth, is generally we're at about 4 hours for internally wired bars. If you have other things going on, like if we do need to do the lines, that can add time. Doing the bushings can add time. In this particular case, we were not over that 4 hours. We clocked in just about at that time. So, obviously check with your shop and see what they're gonna charge you to do it, but hopefully I showed you that this is definitely something that, if you're careful and you take your time, you can definitely do this yourself. I'm trying to think if there were any special tools we used. I mean, we did talk about the ignition tool, which, like I said, is not totally necessary, but they can be had pretty inexpensively. But we really didn't have any other special tools other than that to do this. This wasn't like a motor job or transmission or suspension where we're using a whole bunch of stuff that, it's going to cost you as much as it would cost to get the job done to buy the tools, or maybe more. So You know, either look into one of these, doing it yourself if you're interested, or otherwise give a shop a call and I'm sure they'd be happy to do it for you. Obviously, if you're in New York or Connecticut in the area here, give us a call. We'd be more than happy to talk to you about it. And as always, if you've got any questions, wherever you are, feel free to reach out. Happy to help or point you in the right direction or answer any questions we didn't cover in the video. So one last final call out I almost forgot. You do want to test and make sure everything is working before you button the fairing up. Just a good rule of thumb to always do that. Make sure you wired everything correctly. Make sure you didn't pinch any wires. Just test out all your controls and do that with the fairing off in case you need to change anything up. One thing that we'll do though, and it's worth pointing out, is if you turn the bike on with the fairing off and the headlight unplugged, it is gonna most likely throw a BCM code that the headlight is out. So no big deal there, just go in and reset it and you'll be on your way. All right, that's gonna do it for us today. So hopefully you enjoyed the video and found it informative. If you'd like to stay in the loop with future videos and upcoming projects, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, ride safe and we'll see you next time.